Welcome, Chapter 22, World War I, 1914 to 1918. What in the world was going on here? What started this war? And why was it so big that everybody kind of got their hand into it? Weren't we just at the Congress of Vienna where we were having a balance in the force and the balance in the European powers, and weren't everybody going to get along? What happened? Okay, you guys read about how World War I started. Well, I have a video that I want you guys to watch that kind of gives you a good look at the map version of what was going on. So you can see why this country and this country were allied together, and how this country went with this country, and how he backed this other one up, and where this one came in, and why this fought over here. Okay, I like this video because it gives you a good visual. All right, so take out a piece of paper, and I've got some questions for your pop quiz. Okay, so question number 1. How old was the Serbian nationalist who shot Archduke Francis Ferdinand? Okay, how old was the Serbian nationalist who shot Archduke Francis Ferdinand? Number 2, what neutral country must Germany go through in order so that it could attack France? What neutral country must Germany go through in order to attack France? Number 3, at first, what 2 countries, not including Belgium, declared that they were neutral? Okay. Besides Belgium, what 2 countries at first declared that they were neutral and staying out of the war? Who were they? Number 4, why did Britain join the war? What really prompted Britain to join the war? Per video. Number 5. Okay, so when the war went to sea, Britain had how many battleships? And Germany had how many battleships? 2-part question there, peoples, okay? When the war went to sea, Britain had how many battleships? And Germany had how many battleships? And number 6, last question for this video. In the winter of 1914, on the Western Front, in some places, there was a short truce that was made. When was the short truce made? And what happened on no man's land during that truce? Okay, so in the winter of 1914, on the Western Front, in some places, a short truce was made. When was that truce made? And what happened on no man's land during the truce? All right, go ahead and watch World War I, 1914 link and answer your questions, and then come back to me. All right, I hope that video was helpful. And so now what I want to do is talk about some of the new military tactics that they would have used during World War I. It used to be that everybody would stand in a line and shoot at each other. Well, in World War I, they thought it would be great to do trenching. And so on the Western Front, between France and Germany, they dug trenches. And I read that it was like 475 miles of trenching. Now, there's 3 different ways that you could trench something. And so behind me, my person backs up a little bit more, backing up. Okay, we're going to pretend this is my trench. And it would have been like this, zigzaggy, okay? And zigzag over here, all right? So they could, this might be dangerous. They could do entrenching, which was to stand on top of the land and dig down. But the problem is, while I'm standing there, you can see me. All right, it was the fastest way to trench. However, they would have to do it starting at evening and work at 6-hour periods trenching to get 8 feet down. All right, then there was something called, here I am, then there was something called sapping. And if my person can come this way and get in front of me, okay, sapping was 1 to 2 people working, and a trench would get started, and instead of being on top of the ground, they would start here and just dig a little bit like this off the top to make a tunnel or a walkway this way, okay? But there's only one person could stand there at a time and make a tunnel this way, okay? And then, of course, there was tunneling. Somebody would dig a hole and they would get underground, and then they'd have to scoop, and then once they got their tunnel dug, because then nobody would see them, then they would go along the top and just blow it off, and then they'd have their trench opening. So let's go in the house and I'll show you some pictures of some actual World War I trenches.
Okay, so here is what a regular trench would have looked like. Now, British guidelines stated that 450 men worked for 6 hours a night to complete 270 yards of frontline trenches, which is about the same as 3 football fields length that they did, okay? They also weren't supposed to be made straight. They needed to be in a zigzag formation to protect against poisonous gas grenades being thrown or the flamethrowers from the enemy being used. Here's an actual picture of German soldiers in a trench. They had to be at least 8 foot deep so that they could stand up straight. And to be able to look out, they would have different glasses to be able to peer over. Another invention that occurred during World War I was the tank, primarily because since now warfare on the Western Front was done between trenches, people needed to come up with a way to get across enemy lines and cross no man's land without being shot at. So they came up with a tank. It was first invented in England by Lancelot de Mol on September 6, 1915. It first weighed 14 tons. They definitely got stuck in the trenches they were supposed to go over, and they crawled at a very slow mileage of 2 miles an hour across the terrain. However, they were able to mole through the barbed wire and breach enemy lines. Now, they were first used in battle in Somme, September 15, 1916. Out of 49 that were sent to be used in France, only 31 actually made it across the German lines due to mechanical issues. However, the introduction to tanks made a lasting difference and brought changes to how battles were actually fought. In 1918, France had come up with their own tank called the Schneider CA-1. It took 6 people to operate and had a bit of a tipping problem in the front, but still did the trick. And of course, Germany, also later on in 1918, came up with their own tank as well, called the A7V. It weighed 33 tons, even heavier, took 18 people at least to operate it. Here's a picture of one out in the field, and then I have another one of the German tanks that are in a museum.
Okay, so remember, one of the reasons why I said that tanks were invented is in order to get through the barbed wire that was put in front of the trenches in order to protect both sides from the other side, okay? And as a side note, I thought to myself, I remember learning about barbed wire. Who made that? Well, it turns out that I found out that barbed wire was first patented in U.S. by Lucien B. Smith of Ohio, okay? And it was first used to restrain and keep cattle on the person's land, okay? But then Joseph F. Glidden of DeKalb, Illinois, somewhere nearby, received a patent for modern invention and the machinery to mass produce barbed wire, okay? It was first made to restrain the cattle, like I said, but it was extensively used during World War I to protect the trenches. Now, because of this, planes were also introduced to use as reconnaissance. And they used to use men on horses. Well, that wasn't going to work because they're just going to get shot at. So they used airplanes to fly over enemy lines to make maps of where each other were at, okay? But then they started firing at the airplanes. So then pilots were throwing rocks and grenades at each other and at the people on the land. And well, that wasn't so great. So that didn't last very long. Then they were using rifles. Okay, and then finally, a few months later, they used machine guns. Now, they tried to put them in front of the propellers because they were just shooting off their propellers and crashing themselves. That's not a brilliant idea. And so they came up with the synchronization gear, allowing the machine guns to be perfectly timed with the propellers so that when you fired the machine gun, it would operate only once per revolution of the propellers. And the timing and the thought that went with that invention was amazing. But then they were able to shoot through the propellers and not crash their own plane. Okay. So aviation came a long way. And one guy that you read about in your book was the Red Baron. So I have a video about him. All right, so you should still have your piece of paper out from the first part of the quiz. This is your second part of your pop quiz, okay, about the Red Baron. Question number 1. When was Manfred born? When was Manfred born? Number 2. How old was he when he joined the Cadet Corps? He was kind of young. How old was Manfred when he joined the Cadet Corps? Number 3, how old was he when he joined the German cavalry? Okay, he was very athletic and loved to ride horses. So how old was he then when he joined the German cavalry? Number 4, what happened on his first solo flight during his training? He goes from cavalry to planes. Okay, so what happened on his first solo flight during training? Number 5, in 1917, after 22 victories, he was given command of the JG-1, which was famously known as what? Okay, in 1917, he came a long way, and after 22 victories, or 22 planes that he had shot down, he was given command of the JG-1, which famously became known as what? Okay, those are your questions. Go ahead and watch your video link and then come back. All right, so the Central Powers now finally had the upper hand. There has been fighting in Africa, in Asia, and the United States had been sitting idly by. And then finally, when it looked like the Allies were going to be losing it pretty hardcore, President Woodrow Wilson declared that the world must be made safe for democracy. And so April 6, 1917, Congress declared war on Germany. And then Germany thought, ooh, we better move in and get it done quickly, okay? They thought they could move faster than what America could send troops over to help the Allies with. However, because of the American expeditionary forces, they arrived in France at a rate of about 300,000 men a month, okay? And then with the help from the U.S., then they were able to block the German forces from making it any farther in. Okay, and then everything started to just fall apart for the Central Powers. Okay, you read about Bulgaria and Turkey gave up, and Austria, Hungary surrendered, and then of course the German Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated and ran away, leaving Germany in a mess, okay? And so finally, on November 11th, 1918, in France, they met with the German delegates on a railroad car and signed the armistice to go into effect at 11 o'clock that morning, the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month. And that's Armistice Day, okay? And so I researched, because in the book it said that in the United States we call it now Veterans Day. And so I thought to myself, well, when did that change? So as a side note, 1954, Armistice Day was changed in the U.S. to Veterans Day to honor all veterans, not just the World War I people, Congress passed the bill and President Eisenhower signed it, making it an official thing. All right, so the aftermath of World War I was literally a bloody mess. All right, you saw the numbers of the men killed in battle on all sides was horrific. And then people who just died of starvation and illness added to the disaster. And I think it's interesting that President Wilson's plan for peace sounds a wee bit like when we talked about the Quadruple Alliance, okay, or the Congress system that they tried after the Napoleonic Wars, okay, and so there was going to be a balance in the power, okay. Well, President Wilson's plan for peace was, there was the 14 points you guys read about, okay. So the first ones were that there should be open peace treaties, freedom of the sea, freedom international trade, arm reductions, and national self-determinations. Points 6 through 13 dealt with political and territorial future of Russia, Eastern Europe, and occupied countries in the West. And the 14th point, which he said was the most important, was a general association of the nations for the promotion of world peace. And so then they came up with the Versailles Peace Conference, okay, which had the big four. That was President Wilson, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of England, Premier Georges Clemenceau of France, and Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando of Italy, okay? And so they came up with world peace establishment of the League of Nations, all right? And that sounds great on paper, and I think it's interesting that out of all the countries that signed on with the League of Nations, the United States did not, okay? They didn't endorse it or agree with it or join the League of Nations, although it was kind of in the president's plan of action. And another thing that's very interesting is part of the treaty was the German territorial losses, how they were forced to give up their colonies and their lands. Yes, they also made Germany say that it was their fault for the whole war and that they were going to have to pay for everything. So they were these other nations were setting Germany up for failure and for destruction even farther, because not only are these people poor and broken and losing their land, they don't have a very good set of government set up for them. They were supposed to get help and they didn't really, but they couldn't pay the debt that was put on their shoulders. And you can kind of see how, well, you will see how World War II and how they fall into the trap of listening to radical nationalists that come out of their country or nearby. So it kind of sets the stage for World War II, which we'll be talking about very soon. Alrighty, my peoples. Okay, so next week is chapter 24. I'm going a bit out of order. So we just did 22. You guys have chapter 24. There is no YouTube lesson on Friday because it's Good Friday, but you do have homework Monday through Thursday, so make sure you send it in to me. All right, and then I will be joining you the next following week with chapter 23 and the rise of communism. Ooh, stay tuned.